Hi, and welcome to the Willow Kids podcast, a space where curiosity is nurtured, creativity is encouraged, and learning is treated as a lifelong adventure. At Willow Kids, we believe that children thrive when education goes beyond memorization, when it invites wonder, builds confidence, and honors each child's unique rhythm of growth. In this podcast, we explore how kids learn best, hear from inspiring educators and parents, and share ideas that support thoughtful, joyful learning in academics, the arts, and life. Whether you're a parent, educator, or lifelong learner, we're glad that you're here. Let's grow strong minds and kind hearts together. We are excited to share that the Willow Kids is officially launching its tutoring pilot program in Calabasas, California. This pilot is designed for families who want something more thoughtful and personalized than traditional tutoring, an approach that supports academic growth while nurturing curiosity, confidence, and a genuine love of learning. If you're a parent in or around Calabasas and you're interested in learning more, we invite you to visit us at www.willow.kids to explore the program, see what we're building, and sign up for updates. Spots for the pilot are limited, and we're excited to grow this community together from the ground up. Visit www.willowkids and thank you for being part of the Willow Kids journey. Hi, I'm Sarah. I am an early childhood education specialist, and I have a master's in early childhood education with postgrad in special ed. I'm here with Vivien. I'm really excited to have her on the Willow Kids podcast. Vivien, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, thank you, Sarah. I've been in early childhood for quite some time as a director of programs, and I am also a parent coach.
That's amazing. So, in preparation for our discussion today, we both read a study from Raven Holmes in 2022, which talks about um, how children are learning and the hidden network behind every child's learning. So, we're going to kind of use that to guide our discussion today. Research from the study shows that thinking skills like attention, memory, and reasoning, and school skills like reading and math are closely connected. And when one skill develops, it can help support the growth of others. So, we're going to kind of have that in our minds for our discussion. So, my first question for you is when learning starts becoming difficult for a child, what are some of the first signs that parents usually notice?
Sure. Well, I think for the school age child, signs that they're having struggles with learning could be getting increasingly frustrated with homework, right? So, homework is becoming harder for them. They might start to avoid it. They might start to say, oh, I don't want to do this, or I'm not good at this subject, things like that. Um, Parents might find that their kids are taking longer for tasks when before it didn't seem to be an issue. Um, and they might start getting like concerns from teachers or feedback from teachers about their child. So um, I think that parents, the first sign that they really see is very emotional, right? So they're going to see some things that signal distress. Children might get really upset around homework. They might start crying around homework. So it's really, I think that's probably the number one indicator is that emotional piece.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that can be easier for parents to spot as well. Um, Especially as your child gets older, like we may not all be equipped to look over our kids' calculus homework, but we can see that they look really panicked about it. That's something that like any parent can see about their child. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to show a section of the study that discusses this as well.
Okay.
And it talks about how negative, are you able to see that?
Yes, yes.
Negative feedback and or experiences in one domain may lead to school disengagement or poor motivation for learning. And I think this kind of ties to what you were talking about as well, is that like once school starts to feel like that negative experience and they have that emotional reaction, it's not only that one subject that's hard, it's all of it now starts to feel negative.
Sure. As you mentioned, there is a network of learning. It's not just one subject. So, when feedback is negative, then it just really starts to chip away at a child's confidence and it starts to affect all the areas of learning. So, I think confidence in being, a big social emotional skill is vital in the success of academics.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think once parents notice that something is off, the next question becomes why does
Mhm.
learning suddenly feel harder? And that leads us into our next question, which is when a child struggles with a new skill in school, how can parents tell the difference between a normal learning challenge and a situation that may need extra support?
Right. Well, I think that, children are given different concepts very rapidly nowadays, especially looking at the school age child. So things are going really fast, and there might be some concepts that are drastically different than, the last. For instance, when I taught fourth grade at an independent school, we started our unit on fractions, right, which was touched upon in third grade, but the children had a really hard time with the concept of it. It was very foreign seeing it, in numbers, right? So I really had to relate it to them, what they're interested in, right? So, obviously the first thing I thought about was pizza because kids love pizza.
Yes.
And so once I had that, manipulative for them that they were able to, kind of see the example of fractions with the pizza and the pizza slices, then they started to get, a little bit more, open to learning about it, right? And that sort of thing is very normal because when you're introducing different concepts, there's always this, hump to get over. And, that's extremely typical, right? But then when you see that it's happening over time, over a long period of time, and anything that you try, like if parents guiding their children or, encouraging persistence, right? It's not working, then we know that we need to look into other things. And that could be like cognitive thinking skills, right? Or executive function. So children might be struggling with, those two areas, which, are so important. So, children might be having a hard time like focusing, right? Or having self-control, and that could really, um, relate to how well they're going to understand new concepts that get thrown to them, right? Um, so and, every child learns and they develop at different rates, we know that from a very early age. Um, and you and I being in early childhood development understand that and understand how important that social emotional piece is, right? And the cognitive strengths um, being, learned so that academic success, comes later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought up the pizza example. It's one I always use when talking about teaching fractions because I feel like visual learning is so important. And that taps into, I think, an important factor in this, which is that just because a child isn't getting something doesn't mean that they're not able to get something. It might not be being presented in a way that is understandable for that child. And
Mhm.
I think that's an important thing to look for here as well. And where that one-on-one can also be helpful and teachers just like knowing their students, um, is that it might just be that that gap is truly just that it hasn't been explained in a way that they understand rather than that it's like truly a delay. And so
Right.
I think that's where like practice and support and repeating like exposure to a concept before we just assume that something's like a delay.
Right. And, with parents who are struggling with this concept or really, really scared or worried about it, I tend to relate it to them. Like, if there's a new skill that they want to learn or they have learned, and just reminding them that there is that friction in the beginning, right? They're not going to get it right away. With kids with even like, physical milestones, like with my son who just recently learned how to ride a bike and he's 10. At first it was extremely frustrating for him, um, but my persistence and guidance in telling him you're going to get it and, rewarding that he was not giving up was really what was key in that, so that he felt like he had the confidence. And he literally
Yeah.
learned in a day and a half. He got it, and that was it. And then that was also a great opportunity for me to say, do you see how you didn't give up and you learned really fast, right? And through those experiences, they start to really feel more confident in everything, right? And so that type of
Yeah.
friction in learning a new skill is very common.
Think too what's important is like for that example, like your son, he struggled, he got it, and then he was good. And I think there's another path that also can feel frustrating that children follow where they get it and then they don't quite get it. And then they
Mhm.
get it and they don't quite get it, and then it's solidified. And both are like really normal and acceptable paths. And I think the second one can be kind of frustrating to a parent because you're like, "Oh my god, they finally got it, they finally got it." That's how I felt. My daughter, wasn't rolling over, when she was, like, 4 months old, she still wasn't rolling over, and then just, like, one day she started rolling, and the next day she forgot, and she went another 2 months without rolling over.
Right.
And it was, like, a very frustrating thing because I had called the pediatrician, I was like, "Oh my god, she rolled over, we're good, we hit the milestone," and then she lost it. So I think that like that's something that parents also need to be aware of, like that that's a normal course of way. Yeah, she rolls everywhere. She rolls off of everything. If you put her on a table, she would flip right off. Like that's all
Right.
she wants to do. So like it's a normal path and they'll still get there. They might need extra support. We put her in physical therapy. Um, but that's still part of a normal learning.
Yeah, and learning and development for children is never linear, right? It's not like a ladder that they
Right.
climb, it's really very much a network, like this study describes. So, so yeah, it's definitely common for kids to, take a step back and then might need to, relearn something a different way or start doing something on their own time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to understand like why these struggles happen, it's important to like look at the kinds of skills that children use to learn. Because learning itself, like, yes, it's a skill, but they need skills in order to learn. And so, what kinds of skills do you think actually support a child's learning in school?
There's so many skills that support a child's learning in school, and the most obvious one to parents are academic skills, right? So what the visible outcomes of subjects like, math and reading and writing, right? But there's also cognitive skills. So those learning skills are and what we can refer to them as thinking skills, right? So the memory, attention, and reasoning are all a part of cognitive thinking skills. And then, of course, those executive functioning skills, right? And those involve like the focus and planning and self control. And then there's language skills, right? So, how are the children understanding and communicating ideas, right? So with that, they might have, everything they have in their mind, but are they able to communicate, their
Mhm.
ideas. That's very important, right? So, and then of course, what early childhood development specialists think is the most important is that social emotional, right? How are kids able to manage their emotions, right? And how are they able to interact with others? And that also covers what I touched on before about confidence and motivation. And what I like to also bring up as like, that intrinsic motivation, right? Um, Helping children develop that feeling of, wanting to try things because they are interested, right? So, all of those are skills that are needed in school, not just the academic part.
Yes, absolutely. Um, let's see. And I think like the study um, taps onto that as well, talking about like the contemporary theories that acknowledge that there is a more complex uh, developmental interplay between cognitive and academic skills. That's a quote from the study. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Um, Here. So we have two quotes that really apply to this really well. That one, and then as well, the mastering of a skill supports and amplifies the development of other abilities. The mutualism model is neuroconstructivist in nature, acknowledging that specialized abilities likely emerge developmentally through a process of multi-directional interactions between genes, brain, cognition, and the environment. And I think this is so important because we often think of learning, like you said, it's not a linear process. It's also honestly not a simple process. Like the
Yeah.
amount that has to go on in a child's brain for them to be able to actually learn something and process information has so many components to it.
Oh, 100%. And I think what's great about what this study found was that, um, all the learning skills are, interconnected. And studying and doing, things that are strengthening academic skills are also going to strengthen the thinking skills, right? Um,
Hmm.
Right. So it really is very mutual. And thinking about learning as a web rather than a ladder, I think really
Yes.
helps parents to understand, what's really going on in their child's brain.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good visual, um, because what we're talking about is so intangible in a way, to try to picture how a brain can really like process all this, especially like a small child.
Mhm.
I'm amazed every day, like when my daughter figures something out, I'm like, how you're so small? How did you figure that out? So I love the description of learning as a web as opposed to a ladder. I love um, how do you think thinking about like cognitive skills and how they operate in like real learning situations? Many educators describe thinking skills as the brain's learning tools. What does this mean in everyday learning?
Well, I so thinking skills. So, I mean, it means like, reading comprehension, right? So they're using for reading comprehension, obviously attention, and then memory and reasoning, right? So again, if their attention isn't there, then comprehending the material that they just read is going to be more difficult, right? And I remember as a child, we would do reading aloud in class. We would take turns reading, different paragraphs. And I was so nervous about, reading it right. And once it got to my turn, that I wasn't paying attention at all to the content.
Absolutely.
And then there were times in my early childhood and, early school age years when I would have to read things over and over and over
Hmm.
again, and I always thought, "Gosh, what's wrong with me?" Or I had to rely on friends to tell me, "Oh, what was the the homework assignment because I wasn't focused, right? So those are all those thinking skills that I needed to strengthen in order to be able to focus. And of course, those social emotional skills, that nervousness, getting to, having to wait for my turn and anticipating that. So as you can see, those really go hand in hand there. And those are
Yes.
things that parents it might not occur to people right away, especially if you haven't been working in education. It could be a really foreign concept, right? And so when teachers give those classroom instructions, again, children need to have that attention, right? They need to have that memory because when they actually are told to start working, they have to remember the order, right? Or what they were told to do. And they need to have that flexibility, right? And then for math problem solving, that memory and reasoning is there as well. And with that, I think that, again, relating things to what the child's interested in and really excited about really helps that network of learning, right? Really helps those.
Absolutely. Because how hard is it to pay attention if you're bored? Versus,
Exactly.
like, if you're excited, especially, like, young kids. I feel like as adults, we understand that, like, well, you have to. But I'm picturing, like, a 5-year-old. I'm sorry, all I care about is dinosaurs. Why would I wanna listen to you talk about numbers unless they're a number of dinosaurs? And, like, for a 5-year-old, that is perfectly logical. So of course they wanna be interested in what they're learning.
Right. And then for the early childhood, for, when they're in preschool and things and, you know, they have all of these emerging skills, bringing their needs and interests to the table really helps them to get excited about it. And then they're really learning organically. They're not just learning and memorizing things on cards, it becomes every day for them. Um, and so, through play and exploration, they are memorizing, right? But not in the traditional way we would think of it, right? Like rote memorization. So, so yeah, these thinking skills really work together. You know, as the child is learning from very young age, from when they're a baby.
Yeah, I like to think I'm a big follower of like Reggio Emilia philosophy, and thinking about like placing the child at the center of their learning experience. And I feel like that plays really well into this idea of like intersectional learning, and crossover between topics. Because if you think about in the early childhood setting, a child building with blocks, and they choose what they're building. So there's imagination, there's thinking skills. They have to balance things, that's fine motor skills. They have to lift maybe heavy things, gross motor skills. They have to count to make sure it's the height that they want. They have to communicate with their classmates. They have to then use verbal skills to explain what they've built to
Well,
their teacher, maybe even write something about what they built. There's writing skills. Like there's so many things that cross over into this one thing. And like it's something that I really believe in for play-based learning as well. And I've had to explain to parents sometimes because they're like, my kid is building a tower. How are they learning math if they're building a tower? Like, here's exactly how they're learning math if they're building a tower, and reading and
right.
communication and like social skills and all of these things. So I love like really thinking about that cross section, in learning as well.
Right. So it is very evident in the early childhood classroom, right? When, blocks and everything that you mentioned there, the learning skills and engineering, comes to play. And again, it's done in a way that is hands on and exploratory. So, and they're learning through that, right? So
Hmm.
again, it becomes very organic, and there's so many ways teachers can extend their learning. Like you said, they could document, right, with pictures and with notes of, their thinking process, right? And so there are those thinking skills coming to play. And all of that is some really wonderful foundation for, school age work and a wonderful foundation for life, right? So, all of those in different areas in the early childhood classroom really really helps children be successful with academics.
Absolutely. Um, and so now that we kind of understand like all of the different skills that are involved, researchers started asking a bigger question, which is, do these abilities grow independently or do they influence each other as children develop? Um, do you think do thinking skills and school skills develop separately or do they tend to strengthen each other over time?
Well, they definitely strengthen each other over time. So, just like I touched on a little bit earlier, those cognitive thinking skills, are also strengthened by engaging in academic skills, right? um, those cognitive and academic skills are interacting. And so that also strengthens, or the academic skills also strengthen the cognitive skills. So that concept of mutualism that was brought up in the study is very true. Um, and I think that in this study, they found that this was true in children who are typical learners and also children who are struggling learners. So, you know, eh, little by little, this web gets strengthened, and one piece of the web will help the other pieces be stronger, right? Um,
Absolutely. So this is really the core of the study, and you can see it's literally in the first sentence. Mutualistic theories assume that the mastering of a skill, either cognitive or academic, supports and amplifies the development of such abilities. So yeah, like this is our core. There is no separate skills. And I think this really ties into like the whole child model of understanding education and just thinking that like, every piece is connected.
Right, of course. And I think that, there's something I would love to relate this to, because this happened, with my child, and I see a lot of this happening with children and emerging skills. And sometimes what I notice is that children suddenly they'll make a big jump in a skill, right? Like reading or math, right? So, for one child that I guided, like once their memory and attention got stronger, their reading seemed to just take off almost overnight. So everything before that was, like being sorted, right? So this web of skills was being strengthened, but as soon as that was, coming to light, it's like he jumped right into being able to read, right? So it's like going into like a first grade reading skill, as soon as that web was
Mhm.
strengthened. But in order for him to do that, these different skills had to be strengthened, right? At just the right
Absolutely.
time. Yeah, so it
And it,
really does explain why there are sudden jumps with children as well, right? Um,
yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think this ties into like to the discussion of pre-writing skills in
Mhm.
early childhood. Like, you don't just hand a kid a pencil one day and say, copy down this letter. Like, there are so many steps. Even like I was talking with my daughter's occupational therapist. My daughter's 9 months old, and we were talking about literally just her picking up food and bringing it to her mouth. That's a pre-writing skill. That's something
Mhm.
that she's going to have to be able to do in order for her to eventually write her name. And I think that feels so distant from each other for so many parents that that's a
Yes.
hard dot to connect. You think, well, she needs to feed herself because she needs to feed herself. No,
Right.
she actually you could spoon feed her until she's 5 years old. I don't want to, but I could. Um, but then she's not gonna have the grip strength and the coordination and the
Right.
hand-eye tracking and, like, all of these things that need to be built in order for the next step and 45 steps down the line.
Right, and I think that's a great example how the network of skills are supporting each other, right? And when a lot of parents came to me in the different programs that I led and really were concerned about their 3-year-old or their 4-year-old unable to write, or their penmanship was, backwards or shaky or whatnot, and they were worried
Yeah.
about them going into school age, um, that's when that conversation would come up. So if a child is having a hard time with pencil grip and writing, then the muscles in their hand are just not strong enough, right? And so pushing them too early is going to affect their confidence, right? And they might show frustration, right? They might just completely dislike it. But there's so many ways to strengthen those fine motor muscles in ways that they would love, right? And so, yeah, some parents, it's a foreign idea for them because they think, okay, well, why are you telling me to have my child rip paper, or
Right.
right? Like, how is that gonna help her write? But it's those foundational skills that really also give them the confidence, and the readiness,
I
and
think
pushing it.
too for frustration, like, um, just because they can't properly write their name doesn't mean they don't know what it looks like. And I
Right,
think there can be some frustration for children when their parents like, well, you can point out your name if you see it written. Why can't you write it? Well, it's not that they don't know how, it's that they physically can't yet. I think about I know how to do 1,000 push-ups, but my body cannot do 1,000 push-ups. And I don't think I'm anywhere near being able to do 1,000 push-ups. So it's not that I don't know how. It's not that I don't know what is needed from me. It's that my muscles physically are not ready. And the reality is that can be the exact same situation for writing, for riding a bike, for swimming, for even standing still.
mhm.
Like their muscles might not be ready to stand still. And I think that's such an important thing to think about in that interconnectivity as well.
Right, and, repeated difficulty can definitely lead children to avoid different things, right? So it's this, careful way we need to, see where they are in development so that we can spark curiosity and a love of learning rather than, pushing things that they're not ready for, right? And then just giving them the opportunity. So instead for writing, instead of having a 4-year-old sit repeatedly to practice their name, we can also have clipboards in the dramatic play area, when they're pretending that they are in a restaurant, right? Ordering different food. That clipboard and paper and, writing implement, might spark them to, you know, write things down and in whatever makes sense to them. And that there is pre-writing skills. That is writing skills, right? It doesn't have to be a set up time where kids come and, trace over their name or
Yes.
do the same letter over and over again, right? There it's gonna be a lot more beneficial to them when they relate it to their interests and it's more play-based.
Absolutely. And I think we have seen, I'm a big believer in fostering a love of learning. I think that that's like the best gift that you can give a child at a young age because it's going to set them up to want to learn later.
Mhm,
And I think we've seen a shift away from the desks in early childhood classrooms, the worksheets, or workbooks, and we've seen a shift more towards that hands on learning. And I think it's so valuable And I love that you brought up the dramatic play center because in my classroom, when I taught pre-K, this was always one of the most engaging areas because I would literally theme the entire thing floor to ceiling to whatever our theme was. So when it was farm theme, we got like a big photo booth backdrop with the barn doors. There were vines hanging from the ceiling. There was hay on the floor. They could plant their pretend food in the garden beds. They could sell stuff at the farm stand. Well, at the farm stand, there was a cash register, and you had to read the price sheet, and you had to calculate how much people owed you for what they bought. In the chicken coops, there was a checklist to take care of the different elements for taking care of the animals. So you had to kind of read, obviously, there were pictures as well, but read what you're supposed to do, check it off. There's a sign out sheet to sign out farm equipment. You have to write your name. Like all of this can be brought into the dramatic play to the point where the children don't even realize that they're like doing work, that they're writing
Exactly.
their names, they're counting at all of those things because they're playing. And there is nothing that young children love more than getting to pretend to be adults. Let's be honest. Like
Yeah.
whether it's wanting to be a trash truck driver, a farmer, a postal worker, whatever it is, like they're so thrilled to get to actually live it.
Yeah, I mean, play really is the work of the young child, right? And I think we've seen it over and over again. And just how you described how all of these, the experience with the farm dramatic play, exercises all the different areas of development beautifully without them even realizing. You mentioned the Reggio curriculum, and Reggio is huge on emergent learning, right? So taking the needs and interests of the children and then developing that into something like, you know, if there are a couple children in your class that talk about going to the doctors, and you decide to make a learning experience out of that, that's a great opportunity to then put that in the environment, right? And make invitations for them to explore, and in those experiences are those mathematical and literacy experiences that you described. And when they can connect it to their own lives, that's when that memory there kicks in, right? So it's like the memory of those experiences is going to far exceed, instructional teacher-led experiences where they're just instructed to sit down and do A, then B, then C, then D, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I think about like those simulations and really like big hands-on things that I did even in elementary school. Like I so vividly remember in my first grade class we built a restaurant and we got to actually cook like real food, and each other grade came to visit and we rotated, like you were either a waiter or you were in the kitchen or you were the cashier or the host, and we served food to the whole school the whole day in our little restaurant that we built out of blocks. And that was one of the coolest experiences I ever had. And I remember it so vividly all of these years later. And honestly, I think that's kind of what inspired me to get into education because I always wanted to create experiences like that for my students.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I think the more that school age education and up and through, the senior year creates experience that allow for hands-on exploration is, when children really are going to remember those times, just like you described.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, And I think this kind of leads us into like, can you give some everyday examples of how different thinking skills work together when a child is learning, like reading a story, following instructions, or solving a math problem?
Sure. Yeah, we could do that. So again, I think we talked about this earlier, where like, math and language skills definitely need those the network of cognitive skills as well, right? So, when you're reading something, you're also working with memory, right? And you're working with the comprehension, right? So it goes hand in hand. And also reading is helping those cognitive skills, right? So so exercising this sort of network of skills, it comes in everyday learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it it ties so much into like real life,
Mm,
and the conversation of like moving learning out of only being in the classroom.
mhm,
Because these skills, like if the only reason we were learning things was to succeed in school, then there wouldn't be much point in learning just to learn for school.
mhm.
Like you're going to use reading in your life. So bringing that out of the classroom for families as well, knowing that encouraging your child to read street signs
Right.
is strengthening those cognitive skills and helping foster, what they are learning in school. Um, because when learning is contained solely to the classroom, it gets harder for children to apply those skills in the real
Oh, definitely. I mean, when I talk to parents about what they can do for their children, I always talk about normal, everyday things like going to the grocery store. So simply pointing out the signs with letters, is literacy skills, right? Those are, so that they can, recognize them, but also just know that words mean something, right? So the sign for oranges, is right there because it's representing the orange, right? And so the more a parent does that, the more the child's going to understand. And in early childhood education, when we document with the children and we ask them a question, right? And uh, we write down in front of them their answer, right? Like if you ask an open ended question or like, what do you like to do best most on the weekend, right? And then they might say something like bike riding. Then you would write bike riding down, right? And then you can create a web like that. And then children really see that what they said can be translated into words, right? So that's all early literacy. So one part and one example that I give to parents is reading, like you mentioned. So one of the best things you can do for your child is to read with them. And sometimes kids are resistant to that. So when they are, and others love reading and will want book after book after book, right? But what I suggest to parents who, children are not interested so much at looking at books is do it at, nighttime, right? Because when you do it at nighttime and they're laying in their bed, then they're gonna want to stay up with you and read with you, and when that becomes something that happens every night, then that is just such wonderful, you know, practice for this, interweb of skills and pre-literacy skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that too because I think most parents have experienced their child just one more book, just one more book, just one more book because they don't want to go to sleep. I love that as a suggestion for a kid that maybe doesn't want to sit down and listen to a book normally. I love that. I think what we've kind of tapped on is that each of these skills, like reading comprehension or math problem solving, they use a combination of cognitive components like attention and memory and reasoning on all of those things. And when these skills work together smoothly, learning can feel natural. But when some parts of the system are still developing, learning can feel much harder. So, why do some children start avoiding learning tasks that feel difficult?
Well, again, I think that when things feel difficult, children can feel very overwhelmed, right? So, it's just like with everybody, and planning it so that things are or presenting things so that they're in smaller actionable steps really help, right? because it's a lot less overwhelming for the child. And again, when a child is trying something new and they're not getting it and they're learning something new, that frustration really chips away at them. And, avoidance starts happening because
Yes.
their confidence level goes down as well. And that's why rewarding persistence is so essential with children. So you don't want to just reward that they finish something, right? You want to reward that they did not give up. And, that is so essential for every child to learn and grow up with, the idea of not giving up, right? And then celebrating these little milestones that they are completing, right? So, really helping the child means, splitting up, you know, things in different tasks, right? Small achievable tasks so they don't feel overwhelmed, right? And then making sure the routines are put in place. As we know in early childhood, children really crave that structure. They're not going to come up to you and say, I really won't need structure, teacher. You
Right.
know,
Because they don't want it, but they may need it.
Well, I mean, they really thrive on it, and that doesn't mean like rigidity. There should be flexibility. There needs to be times where we slow down with kids, right? Because transitions can be difficult, right? So we have to be able to slow down and meet them where they are. And that's the same with
Yes.
school age children when it comes to homework or, a new concept that they're learning that might be really difficult. We have to regulate ourselves enough so that our kids are regulated. So that co-regulation piece is so important, in helping your child that is frustrated with learning new academic skills.
Absolutely. And I think this also ties well into our study. And I'll just read the quote for our viewers that this could be because difficulties with specific skills operate as the bottleneck to the development of wider cognitive system and or because struggling learners may choose to avoid exercises that tax their areas of weakness. And I think this ties in really well to what you were saying. Really about co-regulation actually, that if a parent starts to get frustrated with this skill or frustrated that their child is not grasping this skill, it's just going to make your kid more frustrated and then they're really not going to want to do it. Like kids are not motivated by you being annoyed with them. Maybe adults, but not kids. Like they
Right.
don't feel that pressure, they'll just shut down.
Yeah, 100%. I think that, parents are really busy these days, and we have a lot of anxiety if we don't, help our child get things done for the next day of their, of their school day. And I think we just have to remember that, slowing down and understanding where they are is extremely important for them to be able to move on with the task, right? And then also knowing when to pause and say this is enough for today, right? Because we don't have to solve everything in one day. This is very much a process, We want parents and generally in the world today, we want things right away. But we have to step back and understand that this sort of thing is a process, especially when we are dealing with this network of skills, right? Identifying what our child needs is really important, right? And how are we going to do that if we don't take the time to slow down and really understand where is the frustration coming from, right? Um, and, the best thing you can do is just tackle it a little bit at a time. And then, that confidence builds, each little area that is completed. Then they feel like, okay, I have the confidence to tackle this next little part, right? Um, so, yeah, I mean, when, parts of, a child's, network are still developing, you know, um, we will come across, resistance and, avoidance. So those are all things that are very typical.
I love that you touched on like not needing to solve everything today because I think that there's such a like a cultural tendency now to everything is rush, rush, rush. And I
Mhm.
know like I've experienced this myself, especially since becoming a parent. Like I feel like we're rushing to the next nap, we're rushing to the next meal, like we're just everything is trying to get to the next thing.
Mm,
Um, and honestly, the best moments I have with my daughter is when I just stop and just fully pay attention to her and just be in the now, in the moment, and not worrying about, oh, we have to do a nap in 30 minutes. Oh, you need to
right.
like just living. And I think children thrive when they also don't feel that rush pressure.
Of course, and like I said, structure is so important. Like it's good that your baby is getting to understand that, it's lunchtime and then it's nap and then it's that, but that doesn't mean that we need to be rigid with it, right? They don't understand the concept of time. Um, so, there is time for us to really engage in what's happening in the now and not worry so much about sticking to a very tight schedule. So, stopping and pausing and really enjoying what's happening in the moment is super important for our nervous system, right?
Yes.
And that's advice I give to everybody, and it's increasingly difficult in today's society. We are fighting against a society that wants us to do a lot. A lot of people are managing way too much, right? Parents are parenting, they're working as well, and there's so many things going on, politically in the world, and it's difficult time. So, remembering to sort of stop and breathe and engage and think about what's really happening is so important for everybody involved, all of our nervous systems.
Yeah. And I think kind of changing course a little bit,
Mm.
I want to talk about why can two children struggle with the exact same subject like reading or math, but for very different reasons? Why is there, different causes for each child?
Sure. Well, again, because there is an interweb of skills, there is no ladder here, right? So one child might have a really hard time with confidence, right? While another child might have a really hard time with thinking processes, like, memory. Um, so there might be a child that struggles with executive function, right? So that's exactly why, kids can struggle with different things. The thinking skills and social emotional skills that they have strengths in might apply directly to and help them be successful in the academic skills, right? Whereas other children might be developing certain parts of this interweb, right? And I think we all are developing. So, there are many things that come into play with that. But, some children are just developing at different rates, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think the encouraging part is that learning systems can grow and strengthen over time.
Hmm.
If a child works with a professional to improve one weak skill, how could that support their whole learning system?
Well, m- like I said, so, if it is a very mutual, it's very, skills are very mutual. So again, when a child is, doing math skills, right? Like if they're doing, addition, that's going to help them with executive function, right? And certain thinking skills are going to help them with math as well and literacy. So they really go hand in hand. But like you said, they might not be a parent right away. And it just takes time. So being persistent, and, uh, having like, and helping your child build their confidence, right? Um, by co-regulation, and also, listening to their cues is super important for success.
Yeah, I
Um,
think also just bringing in an outside professional can be really reassuring for parents and students. I think as parents, we have a lot on our plate to try to make sure that our child is getting all of the support that they need in every area. And sometimes we're not individually qualified or capable, or you don't necessarily want to blur that line between like parent and teacher in your own relationship in that way. Like I know a lot of parents. I was talking, with therapists who said, my son needed occupational therapy, and my husband was like, "Great, you can be his therapist, and we don't have to pay anybody." And I was like, "No, I don't want to be his therapist. I'm a
mhm,
mom. I want one of my colleagues to come in and do it." And so I think there can be some peace of mind for parents also to bring in an outside perspective, maybe somebody that is not as emotionally involved in the
right.
situation that can look at it with a clear head and really see what the child needs.
Oh, completely. And I think that, all children have like different educational experiences, right? And environmental influences. Um, you know, I think that somebody on the outside can really identify and target the support needed for a child, for a specific skill, right? And once they target that support and help that skill build within the child, then that child will be stronger overall, when learning across the subjects, right? And that also gives peace of mind for both parents and children. So I'm a big supporter of intervention, starting very early. And I when my son was a late talker, and I wasn't necessarily concerned because he was very communicative, with his hands and his face. And so, but I knew that he wasn't meeting the milestones that, the pediatrician had. And, they brought up speech language therapy. And I was like, of course, yeah, because this is a professional that, is giving my child their attention, and is going to be able to really target, what's going on in his development and help him to the next step, right? So
Right.
to me, it was a win-win. And sometimes it's really hard to convince parents of that, because they think that, what they see might as a deficit might be a reflection on their parenting, but it never is. It really is about a child's development. And the more, um, professional help they can get, the better, even if they're on the fence, with, being atypical or a typical learner in certain areas, or even if they just need a little bit more support, that really does bring peace of mind for parents, right? I just remember sitting, in the room with the speech language a therapist, and they were working with my child, who was just 1.5. And I just remember such relief, because at 1.5, they're running all over the place, right? And they're very busy, and your eyes are on them at all times. And I remember that was a chance for me to breathe, and then also a
Yes.
chance for me to observe how she worked with him. And that way I could, help my child in that way when I got home. So if you look at it as a learning experience for parents, and you help parents understand that, professionals can help them with their children, right? Just by observing them. It's it the tension from taking the blame for it comes off, right? Because it's a learning experience.
Absolutely. And that ties perfectly into our last question, which is what are some simple ways that parents can help support and strengthen a child's learning system at home?
Sure. And like I mentioned, and the number one thing that you can do that's beneficial with kids is reading. Reading with them is can strengthen so many different skills. It's amazing. And in early childhood when we're looking at picture books, um, children love being repetitive with reading the same books over and over again. Please indulge them in that because that's really going to help them with different skills, many different skills, right? Routines are really important for them. Again, children strive or they thrive on structure, right? So giving them those routines really helps strengthen the attention and memory. And help them feel at ease and they understand what's going to happen, right? So things are predictable, but not, rigid. Um, and also for the struggling learner, what I find really, really helps and that I've put into classrooms and help teachers develop are visual cues. So whenever you can make something visual and interactive, um, is a great way to help a child, attention and memory, right? So if it's has to do with like, just the structure of the day, making a visual schedule that's interactive that maybe they can take off pieces and stick back on, that's going to help their memory, right? Because their memory is activated through physical motion, right? Um, and then also what I mentioned earlier, like breaking tasks into steps, when you say, okay, let's do this, that can be very overwhelming for a child, right? But when you break it up in tasks, especially when it has to do with a new concept that they're learning, it becomes manageable for them. And, there's less anxiety. Encouraging persistence again is really important. So, not just a rewarding that they completed something, but really noticing. Kids really need to be seen, and that's all they really want in the end. So, when you notice, like, I like how you, continued to try, or I see you really working hard to get this concept, that gives them the confidence that they need to continue. Right. But when we focus on, "Oh my goodness, are they gonna be able to get this done before they go to sleep?" That is anxiety inducing, right? Building confidence and emotional safety. What's big with me and what I talk to parents and other educators about is that children have an extremely hard time learning when they don't feel emotionally safe. So really, starting with emotional safety is super important with every child. So when a child doesn't feel emotionally safe, they are not likely to engage, you know. And that starts in early childhood, If they're not emotionally safe where they are, then it's really hard for them to engage in different experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we've talked about some really great stuff today. Thank you for spending this time with us on the Willow Kids podcast. If today's conversation sparked a new idea, gave you reassurance, or simply made you pause and reflect, we'd love for you to carry that into your week and into the lives of the children you support. You can learn more about Willow Kids' upcoming programs and our growing community by visiting us online. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or sharing it with someone who cares deeply about education and childhood growth. Until next time, keep nurturing curiosity, keep asking thoughtful questions, and remember strong roots grow lifelong learners.